A retired mill worker found a cigar box bricked in the chimney. He dropped to his knees. What was inside that cedar box had been waiting 15 years for someone to pick up a sledgehammer in the right room. Cecil Cresswell was that someone, and he had no way of knowing it when he pulled into the old mill lot at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in April. The sky the color of old dishwater, frost still white on the cracked asphalt. He parked his Ford F-150 near the side entrance out of habit, same spot he had used for 35 years, though the lot was empty now. No shift starting, no foreman at the door. He sat a moment with the engine running, looking at the building. 4 stories of red brick on the bank of the Kennebec River, every window boarded. The smokestack above the roofline like a monument to something that had ended without ceremony. Birch trees had pushed up through the far end of the parking lot, their white trunks leaning in at odd angles, patient and indifferent. The river still ran behind the building. The river did not care. He got out and signed in with the site foreman, a younger man named Davis who wore a clean yellow hard hat and carried a clipboard everywhere he went. Davis handed him his assignment sheet, furnace room, south chimney, break it down to the 3rd course from the floor, stack the bricks for salvage, new ductwork going in. Cecil read it once, folded it, pocketed it. "You know the furnace room?" Davis asked. "Some," Cecil said. He walked the route he had walked 10,000 times, down the concrete stairwell, past the old maintenance closet where his metal cabinet still hung open on one hinge, empty now, his name still on the masking tape strip. He paused at it the way you pause at a photograph of yourself from a long time back, then kept walking. The furnace room was at the north end of the basement. Low ceiling, exposed pipes, the smell of machine oil and old water, and something underneath it all that Cecil had never been able to name in 35 years of working down here. The big furnace had been pulled out in the first demolition phase, leaving a rectangular shadow on the concrete where it had stood since before he was born. What remained was the chimney, a 12-inch flue built into the south wall, running straight up through all 4 floors to the roof. His job was to open the base and break it down from the bottom. He set up his work light on its tripod, pulled on his dust mask, and stood looking at the chimney wall. Old habit, he liked to look at a thing before he hit it. The brickwork was standard for a building this age, except for one section about 2 feet above the old furnace base, a band roughly 18 inches high where the mortar joints were wider and darker, like the mix had been done at a different time. He ran his thumb along the joint, smooth, troweled carefully. Not a repair from settling or a cracked flue. Someone had modified this section deliberately after the original construction. He took his first swing. Brick cracked, mortar dust rose. He settled into the rhythm. Swing, crack, pull the pieces out, stack them in the wheelbarrow. On the 4th swing, the modified section gave inward instead of outward, collapsing into a hollow space behind the facing bricks with a dry sound, like a book falling in an empty room. Cecil set the hammer down. He crouched at the opening with his flashlight. The cavity was about 2 feet deep and 1.5 feet wide. Not an accident, not a settling gap. A deliberate hollow, built to hold something. And it held something. A cedar cigar box. Macanudo on the lid, the lettering gone faint. The cedar had darkened from years in the chimney wall, but the box had held its shape. The lid was sealed with electrical tape so old the adhesive had dried to nothing, barely clinging from memory. Cecil carried it to the work light and set it on the floor. He cut the tape with his pocket knife and lifted the lid. Inside was a manila envelope, the paper gone soft and pale, and beneath it a small spiral notebook with a dark green cover. He opened the envelope first. Pension Fund Disbursement Authorization. Kennebec Woolen Mill Workers Retirement Account. Wire transfer authorizations. 31 of them, each one moving money out of the retirement account into the same destination. Burgess Timber Holdings, LLC. Routing numbers he didn't recognize. Not a Maine bank. Not an American bank from the look of the prefix. He opened the notebook, a handwritten ledger. 2 columns, names on the left, dollar amounts on the right. He knew the handwriting. He had seen it on work orders for 20 years, careful and upright. The penmanship of a man who had gone to school when penmanship was taught as a discipline. He ran his finger down the names. He knew them. He had eaten lunch beside these people, covered their shifts, attended their retirements and their funerals. He knew which ones were still living and which were gone, and which had stayed in this county and grown old in houses they could barely afford to heat. He reached the C's. Cresswell, Bernice M. $47,312.88. Cecil Cresswell sat down on the concrete floor. The box was still in his lap. The work light hummed beside him. His hands went very still. He had always known, in a general way, that Bernice had lost her pension. Everyone who worked at the mill had lost their pension. The fund had failed, the company had gone bankrupt, and the money had disappeared into whatever hole retirement savings disappeared into when a company folded. That was the story. That had always been the story. He had not known the exact number until this morning. He sat there for a long time. When he stood, his knees ached from the cold floor. He put the documents back in the envelope, closed the notebook, replaced both in the box. He tucked it under his arm inside his coat and finished the chimney, down to the third course, bricks stacked in the wheelbarrow, everything where it was supposed to be. He found Davis on the way out and told him the work was done. Davis made a mark on his clipboard. At the furnace room door, Cecil stopped and went back one more time. He picked up one of the facing bricks from the cavity, one of the bricks that had sealed the hiding space, and turned it over under the work light. There, scratched into the face, was a mark, the letter B inside a circle. Neat, deliberate, cut with a nail or a chisel by someone who was used to marking things as their own. Cecil stood looking at it. He knew that mark. He was certain he had seen it before, somewhere in this county, on something that mattered. But standing in the cold basement with the river audible through the foundation wall, he could not pull the memory to the surface. He pocketed the brick and walked out. He drove south on Route 137, the cigar box on the seat beside him, the Kennebec visible through bare birches on his right, stone walls running along both shoulders of the road. He drove past the turn for Bernice's house without slowing. He needed to know what he had before he said a word to anyone. The mark on the brick would come to him. It always did, with the things that mattered. He just did not yet know how much it was going to matter. Cecil spread the documents on his workshop bench at 7 in the morning, the fluorescent light clicking on overhead, the coffee going cold on the corner of his toolbox before he remembered he had poured it. The bench was always clear. That was a rule he had kept since he was 22 years old. Every tool back on its peg before he went inside at night. Nothing left to hunt for in the morning. The documents looked wrong there, laid out in neat rows on clean pine, like evidence in a room that had never needed to hold evidence before. He went through them a second time, slowly, the way he read a wiring diagram, left to right, every line, no skipping ahead to the conclusion. 31 transfer authorizations. Dated over a span of 31 months, the first in the spring of the year before the mill announced it was closing, the last 4 months before the closure itself. Each one moving a specific dollar amount out of the Kennebec Woolen Mill Workers Retirement Account and into Burgess Timber Holdings LLC. The amounts varied, some tens of thousands, one for $112,000, but the routing numbers were always the same. He wrote them down in his own notebook. He did not recognize the bank prefix. He had a second cousin who worked at a savings and loan in Waterville, and he called him from the shop phone. "Those first 6 digits," his cousin said. "That's a correspondent bank code. Offshore. Could be Caribbean, could be Channel Islands. Not American, whatever it is. Cayman Islands? Possibly. Why?" "Just checking something," Cecil said, and thanked him and hung up. He found an old mill employee newsletter in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. He had kept 2 years' worth of them without knowing why, the way you keep things that seem like they might matter someday. He went through the name columns in the ledger against the newsletter's employee list. Every name matched. 214 workers, 214 amounts. The ledger was complete. Whoever had kept it had been thorough. He had not yet looked up who owned Burgess Timber Holdings, LLC. He put on his coat, locked the workshop, and drove to Augusta. The Kennebec County Courthouse was a granite federal building on the main street, copper dome gone green over a century of Maine winters. The marble steps worn smooth in the center from 100 years of foot traffic. Cecil had been here 3 times in his life, once for a deed transfer when he bought his house, once for jury duty, and once to settle his mother's estate. He did not enjoy the building. It had the particular stillness of places where decisions were made that you had no part in. The clerk in the records office was a woman named Pauline, somewhere in her mid-60s, reading glasses on a cord around her neck, who looked up when Cecil gave her the case number and asked to see the Kennebec Woolen Mill bankruptcy filing from 15 years back. "That's a ways back," Pauline said. "I know it is." She pulled it from the archive storage, a thick accordion folder, brown with age. She set it on the reading table and left him to it. The official pension fund report was in the 3rd section of the filing. He found it in 4 minutes. He had worked with documents long enough to know where things were filed. The report stated that the Kennebec Woolen Mill Workers' Retirement Fund had been invested in a portfolio of corporate bonds, and that those bonds had lost significant value in the 2 years preceding the closure, reducing the fund from an estimated value of $3.2 million to essentially nothing. Market losses, an unfortunate but not uncommon outcome. The bankruptcy trustee had reviewed the fund's investment records and found no evidence of wrongdoing. Cecil set the official report on the left side of the table. He set his own photocopies of the cigar box documents. He had run off copies that morning at the drugstore on the right side. The wire transfers predated the alleged bond purchases by 6 months. You could not lose money in bonds you had not yet bought. The money had been moved before the investment story began. The investment story was a cover built on top of a theft that was already complete. He sat with that for a moment. "Find what you needed?" Pauline asked from the counter. "Getting there," Cecil said. "I worked there," she said. "The mill. Part-time, in the office. My first job out of school. 1974, 1975. She looked at the folder. "Lot of people lost a lot when it closed." "They did," Cecil said. She went back to her work. Cecil folded his photocopies, returned the bankruptcy file to the desk, and walked out. In the courthouse lobby, a directory board listed the current membership of the Kennebec County Economic Development Board. Cecil stopped in front of it. The 3rd name from the top, Winfield T. Burgess. He drove north out of Augusta on Route 27, took the county road east toward Great Pond, and found the property without any trouble. He had heard about it for years. Everyone in Kennebec County had heard about it. The Burgess place on the pond. He had never had occasion to drive past it. It was a log and stone house set back from the road, 3 times the size of anything a retired mill superintendent had any business owning. New cedar shake roof, the wood still golden. A 2-car garage with the doors closed. A dock running out over the water, and tied to the dock, a boat. Fiberglass hull, outboard motor that cost more than Bernice's house. A stone wall along the road frontage, freshly repointed. Cecil drove past without slowing. He did not stop. He did not look long. He had seen enough. He pulled into Bernice's driveway at 5:30. Her house was a white clapboard cape at the end of a dirt road, the same house they had grown up in, the porch boards soft in 2 places where the water got in, the gutters needing to be rehung on the east side. He had been meaning to do the gutters since October. He would do them in May when the mud dried. Bernice met him at the door. She was wearing her work clothes still, the faded blue uniform from the laundromat, and she had a dish towel over one shoulder the way their mother used to. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "Thought I'd check on the porch boards." "They're the same as last week." "I know," Cecil said. "Can I come in anyway?" She made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the small kitchen, the slight hitch in her step that she pretended wasn't there, the way she kept one hand on the counter when she reached up for the mugs. The back was worse than she let on. He knew that. She knew he knew that. Neither of them said it. On the kitchen table, under a salt shaker, was a letter from the county. He could read the letterhead from where he sat. Kennebec County Tax Assessor. He did not move the salt shaker. He did not ask. She set the coffee down and sat across from him. "How's the renovation going?" she asked. "Good progress," he said. "They're putting 12 units in the upper floors." 12 families, Bernice said. She looked at her coffee. "That's something, anyway. The building doing some good finally." "It is." They sat quiet for a while. Outside, a woodpecker was working at something in the maple by the barn. The furnace clicked on and ran. Cecil thought about the ledger sitting in his workshop, her name in careful, upright handwriting, the number beside it precise to the cent. $47,312.88. The man who wrote it had been thorough. "You eating all right?" he asked. "Cecil, I'm asking." "I'm fine," she said. "I had soup." He stayed another 40 minutes. They talked about their nephew's new baby, about the weather turning, about a poplar at the edge of her property that was leaning wrong and would need to come down before it hit the fence. He did not say a word about the cigar box. He did not say a word about what he had seen at the courthouse or on the road to Great Pond. When he left, he sat in the truck for a moment before starting it. Through the kitchen window, he could see Bernice standing at the sink, rinsing the mugs. She moved slowly. Her back was bad. The tax letter was still on the table. He drove home. He was in bed by 10, lights out, listening to the wind move through the pines at the back of the property. He lay still and thought it through from the beginning, the way he worked through a mechanical problem. Start at the source, trace every line to where it ended. Burgess had stolen the money before the mill closed. He had hidden the records in the chimney when the bankruptcy investigation got close. He had built the offshore structure under his own family name, which was either arrogance or carelessness, and then walked away. Joined the county board, built a house on the pond. Moved through the county like a man who had done nothing wrong, because no one had ever looked at the right wall with a sledgehammer. 214 names in that ledger. 214 people who had worked 30 and 40 years and come away with nothing and been told it was bad luck. He was nearly asleep when he heard it. A vehicle on the road outside, coming from the south. Moving slow. It slowed further as it passed his driveway. He could hear the engine drop, then picked up again and drove on. He lay still in the dark, listening until the sound was gone. Probably nothing. People took the wrong turn on this road all the time. He lay awake another hour, staring at the ceiling, not entirely sure he believed that. Everett Winslow practiced labor law out of a second-floor office above a shoe repair shop on Main Street in Waterville, a walk-up with his name on frosted glass and a waiting room that smelled of old coffee and older paper. He had retired 4 years ago, or said he had, which meant he still took cases that interested him. Cecil had gotten his name from the reference librarian in Augusta, who said Everett knew more about New England mill pension law than anyone still living. Cecil drove to Waterville on a Thursday morning, the cigar box in a paper grocery bag on the passenger seat, photocopies in a separate folder. Everett was 71, tall and thin, with a hearing aid in his left ear and reading glasses he kept setting down and picking up. He had the careful hands of a man who had spent his life with documents. When Cecil laid the papers out on the desk, Everett went very still and read without speaking. When he got to the ledger, his hands began to tremble, just slightly, the way a compass needle trembles before it settles. "My father's name is in here," he said. He said it to the page. "I didn't know that. Harold Winslow, looper, second floor. 32 years at that mill." Everett turned the notebook so Cecil could see. Harold B. Winslow, $31,400. When the pension went, he went back to work at 68, hardware store on Water Street, worked until he couldn't stand anymore. He set the notebook down and took off his glasses. He died in 2009. He never talked about the mill, not once after it closed. They sat with that a moment. "Are they real?" Cecil asked. Everett put his glasses back on. "Paper, ink, routing numbers, all consistent with the period. The signature on the transfer authorizations matches what I've seen of Burgess on county board minutes." He tapped the top form. "These documents are internally consistent, geographically plausible, and represent exactly the kind of fraud carried out at 3 other New England mills in the 90s. I litigated one of those cases, lost it on statute of limitations. That's a problem here. Potentially, civil fraud in Maine, 6 years. Criminal, longer if you can prove ongoing concealment. Sealing evidence inside a chimney wall may constitute active concealment, which restarts the clock. And if any of these transfers move through American banking infrastructure, even as intermediary wires, that's federal wire fraud. No statute of limitations problem." Cecil filed that away. "Don't show these to anyone else," Everett said. "Don't tell anyone you have them. And Mr. Creswell, be careful how you move around this county for a while." Cecil drove home on back roads. By the following Tuesday, word had gotten to Winfield Burgess. Cecil did not know how exactly. He had not spoken to anyone except Everett and a cousin at the Savings and Loan who didn't know what he was looking into. But Kennebec County was a small place, and the renovation committee was full of people who talked. And someone had mentioned to someone that Cecil Creswell had been asking about the old boiler room. And that piece of information had traveled the way information traveled in small Maine towns. Sideways, through 3 conversations, arriving at its destination by a route no one could trace. The first sign was the truck. Wednesday morning, 6:45. Cecil was in the workshop going over Everett's initial notes when he heard a vehicle slow on the road outside. He went to the window. A dark green GMC pickup, late model, the kind that cost more than it needed to, had slowed to nearly a stop at the end of his driveway. It sat there 10, 15 seconds. Then it pulled away north. He didn't think much of it. Friday evening, same truck, same spot. This time Cecil was on the porch and saw it clearly. The driver did not look toward the house. He drove past slow and kept going. Cecil went inside and called Everett. "Green GMC pickup. Passed my place twice, real slow. Doesn't belong on this road." "You know whose it is?" "No, but I can find out." "Don't," Everett said. "Not yet." Saturday morning, Cecil was splitting wood behind the barn, an hour he kept every weekend regardless of season, staying ahead of the furnace, when Bernice called. He heard it in her voice before she said a word. She did not call in the morning unless something was wrong. "I got a letter from the county," she said, "about the lien. They've moved it up. I had until August. Now they're saying 60 days. A pause. "I don't have 60 days. Cecil set the splitting maul against the barn wall. 60 days from the 8th, she said. That's what the letter says. The 8th was 4 days ago. It's county procedure, they said, routine acceleration. I'll look into it, Cecil said. He thought about what Everett had told him. Burgess still has friends in positions that matter. He drove to the county assessor's office that afternoon. A young man named Garrett was at the counter. County badge clipped to his shirt, the careful look of someone who had been briefed. Cecil gave Bernice's parcel number and asked why the lien timeline had been accelerated. Garrett typed, looked at a screen a few seconds too long. It shows as a routine acceleration, he said. Outstanding liens over 90 days are subject to timeline review. Who reviewed it? It would go through the assessor's office. Who specifically? I'd have to check with my supervisor. Can you do that now? He's not in today. Monday then, Cecil said. I'll come back Monday. Garrett said that was fine. He said it easily enough. But he had not met Cecil's eyes once in the entire conversation. Not when Cecil walked in, not while they spoke, not when Cecil said he would be back. Garrett looked at his screen, at the counter, at a point somewhere past Cecil's left shoulder. Cecil thanked him and left. He sat in his truck in the lot for a few minutes, the green GMC on his road. Bernice's lien moved up 4 days after Cecil started making inquiries. Garrett's eyes that wouldn't settle. Burgess had made a phone call. Cecil was as certain of it as he was certain of anything he had ever looked at and measured and found to be exactly what it appeared to be. The question was what Burgess would do next, because a man who had hidden $3 million in a chimney wall was not going to stop at phone calls. Cecil started the truck and drove home, past the stone walls, past the birches, past the turn for Bernice's house where the porch light was on. He slowed but did not stop. Monday he would go back to the assessor's office, and he would bring Everett Winslow with him. Monday morning, the assessor's supervisor used phrases like standard protocol and routine administrative review and looked at Everett's legal pad with the expression of a man who had not expected a lawyer to be in the room. The acceleration could not be reversed without a formal petition, he said. 6 to 8 weeks. Outside on the courthouse steps, Everett said, "He knows why it was done. He can't prove we know that he knows." He capped his pen. "I'm filing a complaint with the State Attorney General's office this week. The pension theft and the lien acceleration together." Everett filed Wednesday. The AG's office acknowledged receipt by Friday, assigned a case number, and a week later an investigator named Poulin called to say the offshore account tracing would require coordination with federal authorities. 6 to 12 months. Cecil wrote that in his notebook and looked at it for a while. He was rehanging the barn door hinges Thursday evening. The door had been dropping on the left side since winter, and he had run out of reasons to put it off when the shop phone rang. A woman from Maine General, professional and not unkind. Bernice was listed as his emergency contact. He drove to Augusta in 20 minutes. She was lying flat on an ER gurney in her laundromat uniform, a blood pressure cuff still on her arm, looking smaller than she did at home. That was what he noticed first. "I'm fine," she said when he came through the curtain. "You're in a hospital bed. It's a precaution." Bernice. She looked at the ceiling. It went out before, in 2009. The doctor says it won't come back this time without surgery. He sat down and didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. The department was loud around them. Inside the curtain, it was quiet. "How much?" he asked. 40,000, give or take. She almost smiled, like it's a matter of rounding. The emergency visit was 14,000. He got that from the desk on his way out. He drove home after midnight on an empty road, the river somewhere off in the dark to his left. He lay awake that night and found himself back inside the mill, the working mill as it had been, a thing he hadn't let himself think about in a long time. The second floor on a weekday morning. The sound of the looms was something you couldn't explain to someone who hadn't heard it. Not loud exactly, more like the whole building was breathing, a deep rhythmic pulse you felt through your boot soles that got into your bones and after a while became as familiar as your own heartbeat. Pale Maine light came through the tall riverside windows and lay in long rectangles on the floor between the machines. The smell was lanolin and machine oil and something else underneath, something that was just the smell of that particular building, that particular work, and that Cecil had never smelled anywhere else in his life. Bernice had worked that floor for 18 years. He would see her on his maintenance rounds, and she'd look up and give him the same nod she gave him at the breakfast table when they were 12. "I see you. We're fine. Carry on." She was good at the work. She could hear when a loom was running wrong before it showed in the cloth, some change in the sound or the vibration, and she'd flag it before the run was ruined. The floor supervisor said she had an ear for it. Bernice said she just paid attention. He remembered one afternoon in the late 1980s. One of those November days when the light died early and the floor was lit by overhead fluorescence and the river outside the windows was the color of iron. When Bernice had been working a stubborn loom that kept throwing its shuttle. He had come by 3 times and each time she had it back running before he could get his tools out. 4th time, she looked up at him with the particular expression she saved for problems she had already solved. "It's the tension spring," she said. "Left side. Needs shimming." He had looked. She was right. He had shimmed it. The loom ran fine for 4 years after that. He had not thought about that afternoon in 20 years. 18 years of paying attention, and the man she was paying attention for had been stealing from her the entire time. Cecil's alarm went off at 5:30 and he got up. Winfield Burgess came to his house on a Saturday morning. Not the green GMC, a silver Cadillac, clean and waxed. Burgess got out in a barn coat and rubber boots, the way a man dresses when he wants to look like he belongs somewhere he doesn't live. 67, heavy through the shoulders, white hair, the kind of face that stayed pleasant even when the eyes weren't. Cecil opened the door before he could knock. Cecil. Warm, easy, like they were old friends. Got a minute? He came in and stood in the hallway and looked around the house the way men like him always did, taking inventory, confirming something. "Heard you been looking into the old mill records," Burgess said. "I understand the interest. It was a hard time, hard for everyone." He paused. "I also heard your sister's having trouble with a tax situation. The county process can be inflexible. I have some relationships on the assessor's board. If there's a hardship case to be made, I'd be glad to make that call." He looked at Cecil steadily. As a courtesy, one neighbor to another. "That's generous," Cecil said. "Communities take care of each other." A slight pause. "What I'd ask in return is that we let the past stay where it belongs. 15-year-old paperwork doesn't help anyone. The mill is gone. The people who work there have moved on. Stirring all that up just causes pain." He shook his head in the slow way of a man reasoning with a child who is about to touch something hot. "You know that as well as I do." He left 5 minutes later. Cecil stood in the hallway until the Cadillac's sound faded down the road. He went to the workshop and stood at the bench in the dark for a while before he turned the light on. The cigar box was on the shelf above the bench. He took it down and held it. He thought about Bernice on the gurney, smaller than at home. About 6 to 12 months. About $40,000 and a lean clock that Burgess had accelerated on purpose and could decelerate the same way. About Everett's father going back to work at 68 and never talking about the mill again. About 213 other names in the ledger beside Bernice's. He opened the bench drawer. He set the box inside. He turned the key. He stood with the key in his hand. Outside, 2 geese went over the barn, low and calling to each other, knowing exactly where they were going. Cecil listened until they were past. He put the key in his shirt pocket and went inside to make supper. He told himself he hadn't decided anything. He was not sure he believed that. 3 days passed. Cecil did not open the bench drawer. He worked. He finished the barn door hinges. He replaced a section of stone wall along the north pasture where a winter frost heave had knocked 3 courses loose. He drove to the hardware store in Waterville for wood screws and stayed 20 minutes talking to the man behind the counter about the spring mud and the price of lumber and whether the county road crew would get to Route 137 before mud season was fully through. He cooked supper. He went to bed. He got up. He did not open the drawer. On the 3rd morning, he drove to the hospital. Bernice was sitting up. That was the first difference from the last visit. She had her own pillow from home and the library book on the tray table, and she looked more like herself, which is to say, she looked like a woman managing a situation she had not chosen and intended to manage well. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I know," Cecil said. He pulled the chair to the side of the bed. "I need to tell you something." She set the book down. He told her everything. He started with the cigar box and the chimney cavity, went through the transfer documents and the ledger, the courthouse records, Everett, the AG complaint. He told her about the green GMC on his road, and the assessor's office, and Burgess on his porch, with his barn coat and his neighborly offer. He told her about locking the box in the drawer 3 days ago. He told it the way he told everything, straight through, no ornamentation, leaving nothing out. It took about 10 minutes. Bernice did not say a word. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. Outside, a maple was leafing out against a white sky. The new leaves still that pale yellow green they held for the first 2 weeks. $47,000, she said. And 88 cents. She almost laughed. Then she looked at him. How long has it been sitting in that chimney? 15 years. She was quiet again. Then, he came to me, you know, Burgess, when the mill closed. Came to the house with a card and said how sorry he was, how hard it was for everyone, how these things happened in an economy like this one. She paused. I made him coffee. I thanked him for coming. Cecil did not say anything. He sat at my kitchen table, she said, and drank my coffee. She reached over and put her hand over his, on the bed rail. Her grip was stronger than he expected. Don't you dare let him win, she said. Don't you dare lock that box in a drawer for him. She told him the other thing on his way out. He had stood and was putting on his coat when she said, There's something I never told anyone. He sat back down. The week the mill closed, I went back one night for my things from my locker. Late, 10, 11 o'clock. Burgess's truck was at the loading dock. He was carrying file boxes out, stacked up to his chin, 3 trips at least. Overhead lights were on. I was 50 feet away. He didn't see me. She smoothed the blanket. I thought he was clearing out his office. Cecil sat with that. The original records, the parent set Burgess had removed before sealing the copies in the chimney as insurance. He had loaded them into his truck and driven them away, and the copies had stayed in the dark, waiting for 15 years. That's important, Cecil said. Is it enough? Enough to prove he knew exactly what he was removing and when. She picked her book up, not to read, just to have something in her hands. Do what you're going to do, she said. I'll be here. Cecil called Everett from the hospital parking lot. He told him about Bernice's witness account, the loading dock, the file boxes, the date. Everett was quiet a moment, then. That's ongoing concealment. Active, witnessed, dated to the week of the bankruptcy filing. That changes the statute of limitations analysis considerably. There's something else, Cecil said. He had stopped at the courthouse on the way to the hospital. Burgess has listed everything. The Great Pond House, 2 lots on Messalonskee, a camp in Augusta County. Listings went up 8 days ago. The silence on Everett's end was different this time. 8 days ago, Everett said. 2 days after you filed the AG complaint. A long pause. If he liquidates and moves his assets out of state before we get a freeze order, recovery becomes a federal problem and a much longer one. His voice had gone flat and careful, the way it got when he was working through something precise. I need to file an emergency motion for an asset freeze. Today. It requires the cigar box documents as Exhibit A. He paused. Once I file, he'll know exactly who's coming at him. There's no quiet after that. I know, Cecil said. Are you sure? Cecil looked at the maple at the corner of the parking lot. New leaves, pale green, barely out. 3 weeks ago it was still bare. File it, he said. He drove home and unlocked the bench drawer. He photographed every document with a disposable camera, made a second set of photocopies at the drugstore in town, and drove to Waterville to leave the original cigar box with Everett. 1 photocopy set went in the workshop. The second went in his bank safe deposit box alongside the photographs. 3 locations, 3 copies. 35 years of maintenance work had taught him that the only thing worse than a problem was a problem you couldn't trace. Everett filed the emergency motion at 4:30. The court scheduled a hearing for the following Thursday. By 6 o'clock, a process server had been dispatched to Burgess's address on Great Pond. Cecil drove out there. He parked on the county road 200 yards south of the driveway, engine off, and waited. The process server's car, a plain sedan, state plates, pulled in at 6:45. Cecil watched it disappear up the driveway. The dock was visible from where he sat, the boat rocking in the evening wind off the pond. The new cedar shake roof caught what was left of the light. $2 million in property built on money stolen from his sister and 213 other people who had gone to work every morning and trusted the man in charge. The process server's car came back down the driveway and pulled south toward Augusta. Cecil sat in the quiet a while longer. Then he started the truck and drove home. Whatever was going to happen next was already in motion. He could not stop it now, and sitting in his own driveway with the engine ticking as it cooled, he found that he did not want to. You said 6. The emergency hearing was set for 9 in the morning. Cecil got to the courthouse at 8:15 and sat on the granite steps with a thermos of coffee, watching the street. Augusta on a Thursday morning. A delivery truck idling at the curb, 2 clerks from the state office building cutting across the lawn, a pigeon working the gutter with the focused patience of a long-term arrangement. Everett arrived at 8:30 with a leather briefcase and a woman he introduced as his forensic documents consultant, a retired state archivist named Doris Eaton, 64, who carried her own briefcase and did not smile when she shook Cecil's hand, but looked at him directly, which he found more reassuring than a smile. Burgess arrived at 8:55 in a black Cadillac, a Portland attorney in a charcoal suit getting out first. Burgess came out last, dressed carefully, dark jacket, a tie. He looked across the lot at Cecil and Everett and nodded. Unhurried. The nod of a man who had been in rooms like this before and come out fine. Cecil nodded back. The courtroom was a side room used for motions and preliminary hearings. Long table, chairs on both sides, the judge's bench at the end. Judge Audrey Pratt, brought in from Somerset County, had gray hair pulled back and reading glasses on a cord she took on and off without looking at her hands. She set the motion papers in front of her. "This is an emergency asset freeze hearing," she said. "I've reviewed the motion. Mr. Winslow, you may present." Everett set the transfer authorizations on the table one by one, each in a clear sleeve, each labeled. He walked through them. Dates, amounts, routing numbers, destination. He presented the handwritten ledger open to the first page of names. He explained Bernice's witness account of the loading dock. He placed the bankruptcy court's official pension fund report alongside the transfer documents and said plainly that the money had been moved before the investment vehicle the report described had even been purchased. The Portland attorney, Farwell, said the documents had been found in an unoccupied building by a man with a personal financial interest in their contents, and that their authenticity was entirely unestablished. Judge Pratt looked at Everett. "Ms. Eaton," Everett said. Doris Eaton opened her briefcase and set out her technical report and a single transfer form in a sleeve. She spoke the way she moved, without excess. "The paper stock, ink composition, and mechanical wear are all consistent with documents stored in a sealed environment for 15 to 20 years, she said. "These are not recent fabrications." Farwell said wear and paper stock established nothing about signature authenticity. Everett said, "Your Honor, I have one additional exhibit." He reached into the briefcase and set the brick on the table. It was still the same brick, roughly 8 inches long, red with age, the face rough from its years in the chimney wall. It looked small on the courtroom table. It looked like a piece of a wall. Everett turned it so the marked face showed. "The letter B inside a circle," he said. Scratched into the face of this brick, recovered from the cavity where the cigar box was found. The same mark, the Burgess family timber brand, registered with the Maine Secretary of State's office in 1961, appears here. He set a document beside the brick. Burgess Timber Holdings, LLC Incorporation Papers, registered in the Cayman Islands. At the bottom right corner of each page, barely visible, the letter B inside a circle. The same mark, same size, same proportions. Cecil watched Burgess's face. The pleasantness went out of it. Not anger, not fear, just absence, the way a light goes when the power cuts. His attorney leaned close and said something low. Burgess did not respond. Doris Eaton said, "The watermark on the incorporation documents and the mark on the brick share identical proportions. The ratio of letter height to circle diameter is 0.73 in both cases. This is a specific ratio, not a common one. Judge Pratt looked at the brick. She looked at the incorporation papers. She took her glasses off. "Mr. Farwell," she said, "do you have a response to this exhibit?" Farwell said he would need time to retain his own expert. "You had 5 days," Judge Pratt said. She put her glasses back on. "The asset freeze is granted pending a full hearing. Mr. Burgess, you are ordered to present a complete accounting of all personal, corporate, and trust assets to this court within 14 days. Any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of those assets prior to that accounting is a violation of this order." She looked at him. "Do you understand the order?" Burgess said quietly that he did. They came out into the May morning, Cecil and Everett and Doris Eaton, and stood at the top of the granite steps. A man in a state police jacket came up and introduced himself as Investigator Landry from the AG's office. "The routing number's traced to a Grand Cayman bank that has a cooperation agreement with federal authorities," Landry said. "They've already started pulling the account records." He paused. "Mr. Burgess may want to speak with his attorney before he gets to his car." 2 state police vehicles had pulled into the lot while they were in the hearing. Landry went down the steps. The conversation at the bottom lasted about 3 minutes. Farwell stepped aside. Burgess stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, listening, and then he nodded once, and then his hands came out of his pockets and he held them together in front of him, and Landry put the handcuffs on. Burgess did not look up toward the courthouse steps. He got into the back of the state police vehicle with the careful deliberateness of a man doing something he had known somewhere was coming. The vehicle pulled out and turned north on the main street. Cecil stood at the top of the granite steps with his thermos in one hand. Everett said, "You all right?" "Yes," Cecil said. He watched until the vehicle was out of sight. Then, "I'm going to go see my sister." Cecil went to the hospital and told Bernice that Burgess had been arrested on the courthouse steps. She was in the chair by the window, not the bed. They had told her she could sit up for short periods, and she had been sitting up for most of the day. She had the library book again, closed on her lap, and when Cecil told her, she looked out the window for a moment and did not say anything. Then she said, "Good." Just the one word. Then she looked back at him. "Did you eat anything today?" He had not. She called a nurse and asked if they could get another tray. They ate together in the hospital room, Bernice in the chair and Cecil in the visitor's chair with the tray on the rolling table between them. Chicken soup and crackers and coffee that had been sitting too long. Outside, the May light was going gold through the window, and the maple by the parking lot was in full leaf now, deep green, nothing tentative about it. "What happens next?" Bernice asked. "Everett says there'll be a federal trial, 4 months, give or take. They've got the account records from the Cayman Bank. The wire transfers trace straight through." He paused. "The ledger is in his own handwriting. Everett says that's the thing. His own handwriting, 214 names, every amount to the cent. You don't keep records that precise unless you're proud of the work." Bernice looked at her soup. "He was proud of it," she said. "I think he was." She was quiet a moment. Then, $47,000. I could have paid the house off. Could have had the back surgery 10 years ago, when it would have mattered more. She said it without heat, just looking at the fact of it the way you look at damage after a storm, accounting for what's there. "I kept thinking I'd done something wrong, made bad choices. That's why I had nothing." "You hadn't," Cecil said. "I know that now." She picked up her spoon. "I knew it before, I think. I just couldn't prove it." The federal trial took place 4 months later at the courthouse in Portland, before a jury of 12 people who had not worked at the Kennebec woolen mill and did not know Winfield Burgess and had no reason to feel either sympathy or hostility toward a man in a good suit sitting very still at a defense table. The prosecution presented the full picture over 3 days. $3.2 million moved through 31 wire transfers across 31 months. The destination accounts, traced through international banking cooperation, were tied to 4 shell companies, all ultimately controlled by a single beneficial owner. The handwritten ledger, authenticated by 3 independent analysts who agreed on authorship, matched the transfer amounts to 214 workers with an accuracy that could not have been achieved by anyone without access to the fund's internal records. Burgess's defense argued he had been acting on instructions from the mill's parent company and had not personally benefited. The prosecution introduced financial records showing the purchase of the Great Pond property, the Messalonskee lots, and the Augusta camp, all acquired within 5 years of the transfers, all paid through accounts linked to the shell companies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with convictions on all 12 counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, theft of pension funds, money laundering. The judge sentenced Burgess to 12 years in federal custody. She called it a betrayal of the deepest trust a working community places in a man, and she said it without inflection, which made it land harder. $2.4 million had been recovered through international cooperation. The remaining $800,000 had been spent on the house, the boats, the dock, the cedar shake roof, and those assets were liquidated at auction. The total recovery fell short by roughly $400,000, and the court ordered the shortfall proportioned across all claims. Bernice received $47,312.88 in principal, plus 15 years of interest at the state's standard rate. The total came to just over $61,000. The check arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday in November, and she called Cecil when she got it. She did not say much. Neither did he. The county removed Burgess's name from the Economic Development Board the week after the conviction. The clock tower bell he had donated to the town square was quietly taken down the following spring and put in storage. No announcement was made. It was there 1 week and gone the next. And after a while, people stopped noticing the space where it had been. Everett took no fee. Cecil sent him a case of maple syrup from the farm stand on Route 32 and a card that said thank you in his own printing. Nothing else. Everett called to say the syrup was the best he'd had in years. They talked 20 minutes about nothing in particular and agreed to have lunch sometime, and Cecil thought they probably would. Bernice had her back surgery in September. She was home by the end of the month, moving carefully, the way she did everything. By Christmas, she was walking without a brace. She paid the property tax lien the day the restitution check cleared. She had the porch roof repaired by a carpenter from town, and in the spring she had the east gutters rehung, which meant Cecil did not have to. He noticed they were done and did not say anything about it, which was the correct response. She quit the laundromat in October. The renovated mill opened its community center wing in November, and she took a part-time job there, greeting visitors 3 mornings a week, giving informal tours to school groups and historical society members, explaining how the looms had worked and where the different departments had been. She knew the building the way Cecil knew it. She had the same nod for visitors that she'd had for him on maintenance rounds. "I see you. We're fine. Come in." The building had done some good finally, the way she'd said. She put the rest of the restitution money in a savings account and did not touch it. Cecil drove to the old mill on an evening in late October, a year and a half after he had first swung a sledgehammer in the boiler room. The trees along the river were past peak, the maples stripped down to a few holdouts, the birches still showing some yellow, and the light had that flat October quality that made distances hard to read. The building was lit from inside. Warm light through new windows where plywood had been for 15 years. He could see the glow of it from the parking lot, which had been repaved, the birch trees at the far end trimmed back but left standing. He parked his F-150 and sat a moment with the engine off, looking at the light. He got out and walked to the side entrance. The corridor was clean and white, photographs of the mill in operation framed along the walls. He stopped at one, a black and white image of the second floor, the looms running, workers at their stations. He looked at it for a moment. He could not find Bernice in the frame, but he knew what she looked like at that age, and he thought he could find the approximate area of the floor where she would have stood. He walked to the north end. The furnace room had been converted to a utility space. New ductwork running overhead, electrical panels on the south wall, the floor painted gray. Where the chimney had run through the wall, there was now a smooth partition, drywall over steel studs, the same off-white as the rest of the building. Nothing to indicate what had been there. Cecil walked to the spot. He stood where the furnace base had been, where the cavity had been, where he had crouched with his flashlight on a cold April morning and seen the cedar box. He put his hand flat against the wall. The plaster was smooth, warm from the heat on the other side. He stood there for a while, his hand on the wall, in the quiet of the building. Then he took his hand away and walked back down the corridor and out the side door and across the lot to his truck. The engine turned over on the first try. He drove south on Route 137, past the river moving dark between the bare trees, past the stone walls, past the turn for Bernice's house. Her porch light was on. He drove home in the dark.